Yeah, so no one can say this name, so that's why I use PJ. So thank you very much for invitation to present this research. So this is very preliminary. So we're still gathering data from the field experiment. So the data is coming in. So I'm not going to show much results. I'm just going to mostly show you some survey results we have and present this research idea. So so this is research in cooperation with Fino. So Fino is one of the largest payment networks in India. So you should think of them as kind of network that owns a bunch of ATMs or ATM-like technology that allows banks to make cash transactions with their customers, right? So now you're a customer, you want to cash in to the network, to any bank, then they would have a contract with Fino, and Fino would, through the agent network or merchant network, would facilitate these cash in, cash out transactions. So these cash in, cash out transactions are fairly important in that setting. The one example I can give you is like COVID subsidies from the government. So for example, you receive a bunch of money from the government and you want to take the cash out, then you would go to one of these Fino point of sale establishments, and then that's how you would take the money out, right? So now it's really important sort of how dense this network is, because if the network is not very dense, then you may have to travel a long time to kind of get your money out, which is obviously a friction and an access problem. Okay, so this is a business-to-business company. So as I said, they address this last mile connectivity, right? So they don't really own their own. They don't have accounts, so they're not a financial institution provider. They don't give loans. They only allow you to kind of access your account at the other institution. In order for you to cash out, right? So when you enter that establishment, you need to authenticate yourself. So they need to know who you are, so that someone doesn't go in and can take your money. So they use set of technologies to establish authentication, and they're actually pretty advanced on that. So like if we think of like American authentication technology, when you enter like Chase Bank in Berkeley, I mean, it would look really antiquated compared to what these guys are actually doing. And it's interesting because this sort of sophistication of these authentication technologies is kind of coming both from like kind of a firm level and also from the government, right? So they're using a very different very different model of authentication. So the government kind of takes over authentication because they have APIs that you can query someone's picture or biometrics from like a government database, and then government is essentially acting like a centralized authenticator of the customers. And this is a service provided to the businesses, which is really interesting because it's a kind of a reverse in the US. It's sort of all falls on the business, and then the government would use business to authenticate you, and there it's the reverse. So it's kind of an interesting business setup. So this is a very large payment network. So it covers about more than 50% of the Indian rural market. So it's kind of a key provider of access to cash for many rural markets. So you can see that it has 100 million clients. Okay, so for India, okay, for US it would be like a third of the US or fourth of the US. The agent network is very, very dense. So it's 800,000 agents, and they have partnerships with about 110 banks. So you can see like they're kind of an aggregator. So it's a very efficient way to kind of provide this network there, where normally if these banks had to build their own branches, it would be very costly for every bank to reach kind of density and in a specific area, right? So what's the project about? Okay, so the project is about authentication. So there is two points at which Fino authenticates you. Okay, so if you want to become one of these agents, let's say you run a business, so typically these are like mom and pop stores or like little like booths that that you can buy or top up your mobile phone or buy a SIM card. So these people, they can become Fino agents. So essentially they have a right to act as an ATM of a network. And obviously, before that occurs, they need to be background checked, authenticated, right? So there's a friction there that typically, before these new technologies were being implemented, what would happen is that they would have to come to like a physical branch of someone called the distributor. So there would be like a super agent kind of person that you would go in there and shake their hand, and they would run you through the authentication system to make sure you're PJ, you're saying who you are, so that you can get this special right to cash in and cash out money, right? Because they need to have trust in there. So in order to, that turned out to be a friction, especially during COVID. Like people didn't really want to go and shake someone's hand, and like the travel was restricted. It's in rural areas, may not be the very access to roads and vehicles. So what they did is that they developed this new technology that is really exciting. When I saw it the first time, I went, wow, this is like a really, really cool product that you can actually do all this authentication through your mobile phone, right? So they would open this application and they would have to open it kind of at their point of sale. So you have to be inside your store. They have a bunch of requirements when this occurs. So you open this thing and there's a video chat with the super agent instead of having you meet them in person. And they screen your background. So they see like, are you sitting in a store? They look at your shelves. It's like, does your business exist? That's like one thing, right? So so they say like, yes, you're like sitting in your own store, you're selling there, you're operating. So they kind of verify you in a soft way, but there is also this hard authentication, right? So like your biometrics is being collected and you're being cross-checked with that, with the government system, right? So it all occurs remotely. So you don't have to really go and shake their hand. So now the question really is, so this is obviously what after some conversations with Pheno, their major, why they were doing that, their major reason was to lower marginal cost of onboarding, right? Because they thought that they can just run a bunch of Facebook advertising essentially and start onboarding this agent en masse to the mobile application. This is like their dream, right? It was not that they didn't think so much that they can kind of increase access, but it's like lower the cost of lower the marginal cost. So there's like turn it into like a SaaS model almost. So that was their goal, right? So what we did is that we randomized this technology. So we convinced Pheno to randomize it at the point of the call center, right? So like typically this onboarding would involve a call with the sales rep, right? So if you want to become one of these agents, you would make a phone call to a number, to a call center, and they would kind of explain to you what it really means to be a Pheno agent. It's kind of a sales call. And at some point of that call, there would be a pitch, like so how do I do it? And they would tell you like, oh, you have to come in person to this address and like bring this and this and this. Or in the other condition that we had was like, don't come in person, download this mobile application, and then the application is going to guide you through that onboarding process, right? So we randomized this, so what's some research questions here? So the obvious question here is, does this really increase access, right? So this is like the main question. Now, if it does increase access, now who is kind of the person that would not have access to be a merchant and now accesses, right? So we had some conversations with like the marketing folks at Pheno, and it turns out that like they ran pilots, and they were surprised that it actually decreased access for some groups, right? Because there are some people actually that want to shake their hand. Like imagine now someone tells you like, do you want to join my bank? You may hear about me, but like, just download this application and then you become an ATM. Like, so you may think like, well, is it real bank? Is it, so for some people, it's really important to kind of go there and shake their hand. So what we suspect is that, so we don't have results yet on it, but we suspect that there's going to be some groups that it would decrease access for them, right? Because they need that trust to meet in person. The field experiment is actually pretty big. So we randomized about 20,000 prospects. There's this treatment and control. So then we surveyed them, and we have some interim output from the survey. So we did this telephone survey trying to measure so several things, right? So first thing is that, we wanted to measure the onboarding and kind of just feedback on the process of onboarding. Then we want to measure demographics. One thing that we found, which is really, really surprising, is that 99% of these agents are male, which is really surprising. Like we have other research in Kenya where we randomized loans for businesses as well, and there about 30–40% were female. Here it's 1% female. That's kind of insane in a way, like, right? So that's one thing. The second thing is because we thought that this trust is going to be an issue, so we measured a bunch of like attitudinal question towards technology. So we thought like, do you believe that the computers can score people, for example? Like, so can they score almost as good as human, better than human. They can never score as good as a human, right? Because you're getting scored by some sort of technology there, right, in this mobile app. Because part of it is the live conversation. The second part is kind of all this other stuff that is happening through the APIs. So, like if you don't believe that the app can score you well, obviously then you may be reluctant to kind of even start the process because you believe that maybe, it must misscore you or you don't trust the machine, you want to shake the hand, right? So actually 16% of people thought that the computers can make better decisions than the humans. We were like, people have very positive attitude to the technology. So now what's the next steps here? So what we're gonna do is that we're going to get data. So this is the survey, okay? So you can measure kind of who is being onboarded, what kind of person onboards more likely on this virtual technology, what kind of person onboards more likely on the regular technology. But we're going to get transaction data, right? So now, if you onboard as a merchant, as at this ATM, then you're going to start facilitating these transactions because we don't really care about more ATMs, right? What we care about is that these ATMs are going to facilitate transactions that would not have occurred without the ATM, right? So we want to see what's the distribution of these transactions, right? And how does it vary by the technology you onboarded? And if we take that marginal person, let's say that would not onboard on the regular technology, but does onboard on this smoother technology, so sort of like which transactions are being added, right? So do they really expand the market or not? Or maybe they just business steal from other merchants, which would be sort of a less interesting, I guess, for us. But these are kind of the research questions we'll be looking at. So the status of this is that the field experiment is over. So we're just kind of gathering our data and trying to like cross-check the manipulation and get more data from the bank. So the next steps. So there's ongoing analysis of this survey. We're gonna do another survey, like an endline survey. So we did the baseline, which occurred. Unfortunately, it occurred like 2 weeks, I think, or 2 weeks after the manipulation. So it was almost like at the beginning, but we didn't get to because of the bank timing issues of rollout. We didn't get to run the baseline before. And importantly, the surveys, they cover people that did not onboard, right? So that's important, right? So like some people would fail to onboard, and the question is why. So I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on. Like one thing that we didn't expect, for example, is going on is that this technology, for example, prohibits bargaining, right? So like if you go in person to onboard, you can actually negotiate a better price because you have to pay a franchise fee to become this ATM. And you can get a discount, and on the app you don't, right? So there are some things that are going on that we think are interesting, and the endline survey is pending. So this is kind of where we're at. So thanks a lot for listening. Yeah.
Great, thank you for all the presentations. This is for PJ. I was curious. So you mentioned that some of the results were like decreased access, and you talked about like lack of trust as being one of those reasons. And I was curious, with the intervention being focused on kind of a machine learning supported, remote using video and audio and whatnot. And of course, we've seen in the US context around facial recognition and, how there's differential impacts in terms success in terms of, resulting better for essentially white people and men over others. And I was curious if you explored within those results related to differential access, was there anything related to like skin color, any terms of like differences in terms of caste perhaps, or have you kind of broken down any sort of, and what were the kind of alternatives for people that perhaps couldn't be verified through that machine learning based tool?
Right. So this is a very good question. So it touches on this algorithmic bias problem in this machine learning algorithm. So one thing that is going to occur immediately is that it's not going to work as well for female, right? Because if you have only 1% female in the training data set, well, it just by the size of the information you have, we suspect that it may fail there. So that's something that they will have to address because it's kind of self-perpetuating inequality, right? Because you don't get any females, and then maybe in the future, if you use that data to onboard females, maybe you're not going to get any again. So like it's sort of, it's a great question. And for females, it's going to be very salient. I think color of the skin there matters a little bit less because it's more like, I think some of these areas are more homogeneous. So you do get like pretty big samples of pretty much like every tone. So it's not like in American training data says that they have, essentially like very little Black people in these training samples, and that's why they were not running very well. But it's a great question, and they will have to address that because it's financial technology, right? So it's not, it's very regulated, so they will have to make sure that it works well on different portions of the sample, right? But great, thank you, yeah.
Can I just ask a follow-up question? This is Laura. I didn't catch so you said there's different training. So you have a very small percentage of women being trained. Why is that?
Oh, it's so just mechanical because out of, let's say, 20,000 agents they onboard, the agents they have, only 20 would be female. So if you have only 20 observation to learn what's the female that should be onboarded versus not. So like the algorithm has like no chance to learn anything about that population. So it just underperforms in that segment.
So it really, the problem is that you only have 20 at the beginning. And so the algorithm can't work on the size of that population.
Exactly. So I think like for facial recognition, this is like very obvious, right? Because like obviously like a white face is very different than black face, and the algorithm has to look for different features. Here, it's unclear what's going to happen because like maybe, store owned by the female, it's not that different from a male store. So then you can use kind of features of a male shop to authenticate a female, but that's an empirical question, right?
Okay.